Hello and welcome to India Reads. We are reading the story of My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi. We reached a stage where Gandhi had recovered from his illness and was preparing for the response of the people of India against the Rowlatt Act. I read up on the Rowlatt Act. The Rowlatt Act was an act which was passed in 1919, which was a slightly draconian law which allowed the government to arrest and detain anybody who would be seen as dissenting against the laws of the British Empire. That time, Gandhi and many people in the public space at that point of time resisted against it, and the strategy that Gandhi adopted or decided to adopt was to launch one of his first civil disobedience movement across India. So they had set aside a date, and then the date was advanced rather to sometime in April and or March. So let's get more details of this. Let's start reading chapter. Section 31, that memorable week 1. After a short tour in South India, I reached Bombay. I think on the 4th of April, having received a wire from Shankarlal Banker asking me to be present there for the 6th of April celebrations. But in the meanwhile, Delhi had already observed the Hartal on the 30th of March. The word of the late Swami Shraddhanandji and Hakim Ajmal Khan Sahib was a law there. The wire about the postponement of the Hartal till the 6th of April had reached there too late. Delhi had never witnessed a Hartal like this before. Hindus and Muslims seemed united like one man. Swami Shraddhanandji was invited to deliver a speech in the Jama Masjid, which he did. All this was more than the authorities could bear. The police checked the Hartal procession as it was proceeding towards the railway station and opened fire, causing a number of casualties, and the reign of repression commenced in Delhi. Shraddhanandji urgently summoned me to Delhi. I wired back saying that I would start for Delhi immediately after the 6th of April celebrations were over in Bombay. The story of happenings in Delhi was repeated with variations in Lahore and Amritsar. From Amritsar, doctors Satyapal and Kichulu had sent me a pressing invitation to go there. I was altogether unacquainted with them at that time, but I communicated to them my intention to visit Amritsar after Delhi. On the morning of the 6th, the citizens of Bombay flocked to the Chowpatty for a bath in the sea, after which they moved on in a procession to Thakurdwar. The procession included a fair sprinkling of women and children, while the Muslims joined in large numbers. From Thakurdwar, some of us who were in the procession were taken by the Muslim friends to a mosque nearby, where Mrs. Naidu and myself were persuaded to deliver speeches. Vithaldas Jeraji proposed that we should then and there administer the Swadeshi and Hindu-Muslim unity pledges to the people. But I resisted the proposal on the ground that the pledges should not be administered or taken in precipitate hurry, and that we should be satisfied with what had already been done by the people. A pledge once taken, I argued, must not be broken afterwards. Therefore, it was necessary that the implications of the Swadeshi pledge should be clearly understood, and the grave responsibility entailed by the pledge regarding the Hindu-Muslim unity fully realized by all concerned. In the end, I suggested that those who wanted to take the pledge should again assemble on the following morning for the purpose. Needless to say that the Hartal in Bombay was a complete success. Full preparation had been made for starting civil disobedience. Two or three things had been discussed in this connection. It was decided that the civil disobedience might be offered in respect of such laws only as easily lend themselves to being disobeyed by the masses. The Salt Act was extremely unpopular and was a popular movement that had been going on for some time past to secure its repeal. I therefore suggested that the people might prepare salt from seawater in their own houses in disregard of the salt laws. My other suggestion was about the sale of proscribed literature. Two of my books, Hind Swaraj and Sarvodaya, Gujarati adaptation of Ruskin's Unto the Last, which had already been proscribed, came in handy for this purpose. To print and sell them openly seemed to be the easiest way of offering civil disobedience. A sufficient number of copies of the books was therefore printed, and it was arranged to sell them at the end of the monster meeting that was to be held in that evening after the breaking of the fast. On the evening of the 6th, an army of volunteers issued forth accordingly with this proscribed literature to sell it amongst the people. Both Srimati Sarojini Devi and I went out in cars. All the copies were soon sold out. The proceeds of the sale was to be utilized for furthering the civil disobedience campaign. Both these books were priced at 4 annas per copy, but I hardly remember anyone having purchased from me at their face value merely. Quite a large number of people simply poured out the cash that was there in their pockets to purchase their copy. 5 and 10 rupee notes just flew out to cover the price of a single copy. While in one case I remember having sold a copy for 50 rupees. It was duly explained to the people that they were liable to be arrested and imprisoned for purchasing the proscribed literature. But for the moment they had shed all fear of jail going. It was subsequently learned that the government had conveniently taken the view that the books had been proscribed by it had not in fact been sold, and that what we had sold was not held as coming under the definition of proscribed literature. The reprint was held by the government to be a new edition of the books that had been proscribed, and to sell them did not constitute an offence under the law. The news caused general disappointment. The next morning, another meeting was held for the administration of the pledges with regard to the Swadeshi and Hindu Muslim unity. Vithaldas Jairaj for the first time realized that all is not gold that glitters. Only a handful of persons came. I distinctly remember some of the sisters who were present on the occasion. The men who attended were also a few. I had already drafted the pledge and brought it with me. I thoroughly explained its meaning to those present before I administered it to them. The paucity of the attendance neither pained nor surprised me, for I have noticed this characteristic difference in the popular attitude, partially for exciting work, dislike for quite constructive effort. The difference has persisted to this day. But I shall have to devote to this subject a chapter by itself. To return to the story, on the night of the 7th, I started for Delhi. In Amritsar, on reaching Mathura on the 8th, I heard rumors about my probable arrest. At the next stoppage after Mathura, Acharya Gidwani came to meet me and gave me definite news that I was going to be arrested, and offered his services to me if I should need them. I thanked him for the offer, assuring him that I would not fail to avail myself of it, and if and when I felt it necessary. Before the train reached Palwal railway station, I was served with a written order to the effect that I was prohibited from entering the boundary of Punjab, as my presence was likely to result in a disturbance of peace. I was asked by the police to get down from the train. I refused to do so, saying, I want to go to the Punjab, in response to a pressing invitation not to foment unrest but to allay it. I am therefore sorry that it is not possible for me to comply with this order. At last the train reached Palwal. Mahadev was with me. I asked him to proceed to Delhi to convey to Swami Shraddhanandji the news of what had happened, and to ask the people to remain calm. He was to explain why I had decided to disobey the order served upon me and suffer the penalty for disobeying it, and why it would spell victory from our side if we could maintain perfect peace in spite of any punishment that might be inflicted upon me. At Palwal railway station, I was taken out of the train and put under police custody. A train from Delhi came in short time. I was made to enter a third-class carriage, the police party accompanying. On reaching Mathura, I was taken to the police barracks, but no police official could tell me as to what they proposed to do with me or where I was to be taken next. Even at 4 o'clock the next morning, I was awoken and put in a goods train that was going towards Bombay. At noon, I was again made to get down at Sawai Madhopur. Mr. Bowring, Inspector of Police, who arrived by the mail train from Lahore, now took charge of me. I was put in a first-class compartment with him, and from an ordinary prisoner, I became a gentleman's prisoner. The officer commenced a long panegyric of Sir Michael O'Dwyer. Sir Michael had nothing against me personally, he went on. Only he apprehended a disturbance of peace if I entered the Punjab and so on. In the end, he requested me to return to Bombay of my own accord and agreed not to cross the frontier of Punjab. I replied that I could not possibly comply with the order and that I was not prepared on my own accord to go back. Whereupon the officer, seeing no other course, told me that he would have to enforce the law against me. But what would you want to do with me? I asked him. He replied that he himself did not know, but I was awaiting further orders. For the present, he said, I am taking you to Bombay. We reached Surat. Here I was made over to the charge of another police officer. You're now free, the officer told me when we had reached Bombay. It would, however, be better, he added, if you get down near the marine lines, where I shall get the train stopped for you. At Colaba, there's likely to be a big crowd. I told him that I would be glad to follow his wish. He was pleased and thanked me for it. Accordingly, I alighted at the marine lines. The carriage of a friend happened to be passing by. It took me and left me at Reva Shankar Javedi's place. A friend told me that the news of my arrest had incensed people and roused them to a pitch of mad frenzy. An outbreak is apprehended every minute at near Paidhuni. The magistrate and the police have already arrived there, he added. Scarcely had I reached my destination when Umar Sobani and Anusya Bain arrived and asked me to motor to Paidhuni at once. The people have become impatient and are very much excited. We cannot pacify him. Your presence alone can do it. I got into the car. Near Paidhuni, I saw that a large crowd had gathered. On seeing me, the people went mad with joy. A procession was immediately formed and the sky was rent with shouts of Vande Mataram and Allahu Akbar. At Paidhuni, we sighted a body of mounted police. Brickbats were raining down from above. I besought the crowd to be calm, but it seemed as if we should not be able to escape the shower of brickbats. As the procession issued out of Abdul Rahman Street and was about to proceed towards Crawford Market, I suddenly found itself confronted by a body of mounted police who had arrived there to prevent it from proceeding further in the direction of the fort. The crowd was densely packed. It had almost broken through the police cordon. There was hardly any chance of my voice being heard in that vast concourse. Just then, the officer in charge of the mounted police gave the order to disperse the crowd, and at once the mounted police charged upon the crowd, brandishing their lances as they went. For a moment, I felt that I would be heard, but my apprehensions was groundless. The lancers just grazed the car as the lancers swiftly passed by. The ranks of the people were soon broken, and they were thrown into utter confusion, which was soon converted into a rout. Some got trampled underfoot, others were badly mauled and crushed. In that seething mass of humanity, there was hardly any room for horses to pass, nor was there an exit by which people could disperse. So the lancers blindly cut their way through the crowd. I hardly imagine what they could see, what they are doing. The whole thing presented a most dreadful spectacle. The horsemen and the people were mixed together in mad confusion. Thus the crowd was dispersed and the progress checked. Our motor was allowed to proceed. I had stopped it before the commissioner's house and got down to complain to him about the conduct of the police. That memorable week, part 2. So I went to the commissioner, Mr. Griffith's office. All about the staircase leading to the office, I saw soldiers armed from top to toe as though for military action. The veranda was still astir. When I was admitted to the office, I saw Mr. Bowring sitting with Mr. Griffith. I described to the commissioner the scenes I had witnessed. He replied briefly, I do not want the procession to proceed to the fort, as a disturbance was inevitable there. And as I saw that the people would not listen to our persuasion, I could not help but order the mounted police to charge through the crowd. But, said I, you know what the consequences might be. The houses were bound to trample up on the people. I think it was quite necessary to send that contingent of I think it's quite unnecessary to send that contingent of mounted men. You cannot judge that, said Mr. Griffith. The police officers know better than you the effect of teaching on the people. If we did not start with drastic measures, the situation would pass out of our hands. I tell you that the people are sure to go out of your control. Disobedience of law will quickly appeal to them. It is beyond them to understand the duty of keeping peaceful. I have no doubt about your intentions, but the people will not understand them. They will follow their natural instincts. It is there that I join issue with you, I replied. The people are not by nature violent but peaceful. And thus we argued at length. Ultimately, Mr. Griffith said, but suppose you were convinced that your teaching has been lost onto the people, what would you do? I should suspend civil disobedience if I were so convinced. What do you mean? You told Mr. Bawring that you would proceed to the Punjab the moment you were released. Yes, I wanted to do so by the next available train, but it is out of the question today. If you will be patient, the conviction is sure to grow on you. Do you know what is happening in Ahmedabad and what has happened in Amritsar? People have everywhere gone nearly mad. I'm not yet in possession of all the facts. The telegraph wires have been cut in some places. I put it to you that the responsibility of all these disturbances lie on you. I assure you, I would be ready to take upon myself wherever I discovered it. But I should be deeply pained and surprised if I found that there were disturbances in Ahmedabad. I cannot answer for Amritsar. I have never been there, nor anyone knows me there. But even about the Punjab, I am certain of this, that had not the Punjab government prevented my entry into Punjab, I would have been considerably helpful in keeping the peace there. By preventing me, they gave their people unnecessary provocation. So we argued on and on. It was impossible for us to agree. I told him that I intended to address a meeting on the Chowpatty and ask the people to keep their peace, and took leave of him. The meeting was held on the Chowpatty sands. I spoke at length on the duty of non-violence and the limitations of a satyagraha, and said satyagraha is essentially a weapon of the truthful. The satyagrahis pledge to non-violence, and unless people observe it in thought, word and deed, I cannot offer mass satyagraha. Anusuya too had received news of the disturbance. Someone had spread a rumor that she also had been arrested. The mill hands had gone mad over her rumored arrest, stuck work and committed acts of violence, and a sergeant had been done to death. I proceeded to Ahmedabad. I learned that an attempt had been made to pull up the rails near the Nadia railway station, that a government officer had been murdered in Viramgam, and that Ahmedabad was under martial law. The people were terror stricken. They had indulged in acts of violence and were made to pay for them with arrest. A police officer was waiting in the station to escort me to Mr. Pratt, the commissioner. I found him in a state of rage. I spoke to him gently and expressed my regret for the disturbances. I suggested that martial law was unnecessary and declared my readiness to cooperate in all efforts to restore peace. I asked for permission to hold a public meeting on the grounds of Sabarmati Ashram. The proposal appealed to him, and the meeting was held, I think, on Sunday, 13th of April, and martial law was withdrawn the same day or the day after. Addressing the meeting, I tried to bring to the people their sense of wrong, declared a penitential fast of 3 days for myself, and appealed to the people to go on similar fasts for a day, and suggested to those who had been guilty of acts of violence to confess their guilt. I saw my duty as clear as daylight. It was unbearable for me to find that the laborers amongst whom I had spent a great deal of time, whom I had served and from whom I had expected better things, had taken part in the riots, and I felt I was a sharer in the guilt. Just as I suggested to the people to confess their guilt, I suggested to the government to condone their crimes. Neither accepted the suggestion. The late Sir Raman Bhai and citizens of Ahmedabad came to me with an appeal to suspend Satyagraha. The appeal was needless, for I had already made up my mind to suspend Satyagraha as long as people had not learned the lesson of peace. The friends went away happy. There were, however, others who were unhappy with the decision. They felt that if I had expected peace everywhere and regarded as a condition precedent to launching satyagraha, mass satyagraha would be an impossibility. I was sorry to disagree with them. If amongst whom I had worked and whom I expected to be prepared for non-violence and self-suffering could not be non-violent, satyagraha was certainly impossible. I was firmly of the opinion that those who wanted to lead the people to satyagraha ought to be able to keep the people under within the limited non-violence expected of them. I hold the same opinion even today. So I'm going to stop here and quickly recap. What's happened here is Gandhi was mentally prepared for being arrested after announcing the All India Hartal. The Hartal was initially planned for 30th of March, and then it was pushed to 6th of April in Bombay. However, many places the news of the postponement had not reached, and they decided to do it on the 30th of March itself. For example, Punjab. From Punjab, Gandhi received a lot of correspondence on the status of the Hartal. He was also called to Amritsar to come and check the situation. Gandhi promised to do so, but not immediately. He decided to stay on till the 6th of April in Bombay and finish the Hartal, and only then decide to leave for Amritsar. Similarly, he got a offer to come and visit Lahore, and he said that he would do so after his visit to Delhi. Actually, he's decided to go to Delhi and then to Amritsar. And similarly, wherever he was called, he's committed to come subsequently. Now, about the Hartal in Bombay, it went on well. Uh, Hartal essentially meant that people would not be working, and therefore this was one of the first civil disobedience experiments that worked for Gandhi. Gandhi also started looking for laws which could be purposely broken to antagonize the British, and he therefore realized that laws like the Salt Act law, where they were asked to pay extra tax for salt, could be overcome by people developing their own salt from seawater. The other law that he felt could be broken was uh, releasing books or literature which were proscribed by the government. Two of his books also were part of it, so he made sure that people started printing, and his movements, whenever they had large gatherings, they will also ensure that these books were sold. The government kind of got away by saying that these books were no longer prescribed, and if people wanted, they could buy and sell these books. But however, on the issue of salt, they did not. Obviously, there is no mention here. It definitely goes on to become a big movement, as we will see in the coming chapters. So Gandhi kind of started looking at what are the laws that they could break, or rather what are the unjust laws which they could protest against, so that they could make a mark. Now, as far as the Hartal went, it went quite successfully, and on the 6th of April, all the places went on strike in Bombay. However, none of the satyagraha movements were completely devoid of violence. So when the 6th of April celebrations day was announced, there was also this there were also two pledges which were recommended to Gandhi that people take in that forum. One on the Hindu-Muslim unity, two on the Satyagraha pledge. Now, Gandhi felt that that's not the right way to just offer it to people and ask them to take a pledge immediately. A pledge should be taken very seriously, and if a pledge is to be taken seriously, the people should know what they are pledging, and therefore he said that they would do the pledge ceremony the next day. Before that, let people understand and agree and come on their own accord. So the next day the pledge ceremony also happened. There was a mention about Hindu-Muslim unity, and there was a mention of fighting against the British the Satyagraha way. So this is roughly what today's reading was about. We would have only one more reading, after which we would have finished the book, and that's where we are. If you have any suggestions, any inputs, do drop it in the comment section. I will see you in the next recording. Till then, goodbye.